Welcome to our module number 2. This one will help us to know the state of social investments in Africa. Basically, the module will start by looking at the legal and institutional frameworks that guide the provision of social investments in Africa. We will then look at the instruments of social investments that are present and see how Africa performs in relation to meeting SDGs as well as Agenda 2063. So, as a way of introduction, the main point that we may want to drive across is that if there are no legal frameworks for social investments, this would mean that the provision of social investments remains discretionary and not rights-based. But once institutions are there as well as the legal frameworks, then our social protection as well as our social services will be rights-based, and that could be one way to go. The module will also look at the case studies, like we are going to use Mauritania as well as Kenya as our case studies for health services as well as for education services, respectively. So this is the overall picture of the legal and institutional. So we have this legal framework that starts with the constitutions at a country level. So constitutions typically are associated with constitutional courts to protect human rights, to social protection, as well as social service provision. So we typically check if the constitution has or spells some rights. Could be in relation to health, could be in relation to education. So these will be important as they get to be used by the constitutional court should need arise. So there's this link between the legal framework as well as the institutional framework. Also, at a country level context, we have statutory laws. These are laws that are typically enacted in line with the Constitution. And these laws are put in place by the legislature, making the legislature that if we have an institution that legislates, definitely we will have a framework of statutory laws and a legal framework. So there's this connection between the two. In some countries, we've had cases where there is a presidential decree. This presidential decree is usually done by the head of state. So if a decree is issued to offer social protection, it sort of becomes a legal framework in which social protection or social services can be provided. Also, in a country context, we've got regulations as well as policies. Now, regulations are mostly for agencies. Like you'll find that in some countries, social protection will be run by an agency. So these agents will have to abide by the organizational rules. The policies that are put in place for social protection as well, they also formulate or become part of the institutional arrangements or organizational rules that guide the implementation of social protection or social services. Then, at a regional level, most of the legal frameworks that relate to social protection as well as social services are formulated under charters, and these are mostly issued at the African Union level. Then covenants, conventions, and recommendations are typically done at an international level, so they form part of the international institutions. Mostly, ILO operates under conventions as well as recommendations. Covenants will be other UN organizations. So this is the overall framework which provides for our social investment. It is critical because once it is in place, it becomes easy for social protection to be a rights-based, for instance. Now, let us look at the overall picture of social assistance in Africa. So while I'm here, I will quickly take this opportunity to review again so that you continue to understand these concepts. So we've got social investments, which is split into social protection as well as social services. Under social protection, we have got three instruments, which are social assistance, social insurance, and access to social services. Mind the third one, it's access to social services and not social services. That's key. So here we are picking on one instrument of social protection, which also belongs to social investments. Social assistance also entails three instruments. These are your cash transfers, which are the dominant instrument in Africa. As you can see in the slide, they constitute about 72%. And then we have got food transfers. These ones are now dwindling with time, and we are only left with 2% of food transfers in Africa. They are mostly found in Botswana as well as in Ethiopia. Then we've got public works, which constitute about 23%. The rest are mixed, and they are almost 4%. The cash transfers in particular are unconditional. By unconditional, we mean that they are not attached to any condition or to any requirement on the part of the participants. Conditional cash transfers, in turn, require participants to do something in order to remain in the program. For instance, a cash transfer may require that participants must send their children to school. So if the participants do not send children to school, then they will not receive the cash transfer. So the condition will be to access education, for instance, or to access a health facility. Most of these conditional programs are found in Latin America, but in Africa, as you can see, most of them are unconditional. However, they still have an objective of making sure that participants have improved access to social services. So here we are now giving the state of social assistance in the regions of Africa. We will start with Central Africa, sorry. So in Central Africa, you can see with the axis that most people or most groups in the life cycle are not covered by social assistance. There are very few programs which are found in Burundi, Cameroon, as well as in the Republic of Congo and Sao Tome and Principe. So there is a lot of work that is needed in terms of social assistance in Central Africa. In East Africa, the situation is a bit better. We've got a country such as Rwanda that has got programs that cover all the groups of the life cycle. In North America, mostly the programs cover children as well as older persons and persons with disability. North Africa also, you realize that it may not have a lot of social assistance because it comes from a history where it provided its social protection through subsidies and not necessarily through social assistance. Southern Africa has got the most mature programs of social assistance, some starting as early as the 1930s. This program is found in South Africa. So mostly these programs cover children, old persons, and persons with disabilities. So almost all the countries in Southern Africa have a program that covers these groups. The youths and adults at times are not covered by some countries. So that's the state of social assistance in Southern Africa. Then in West Africa, the picture is mixed, right? But almost all the groups are covered by some countries. But again, some groups are not covered. If you take a country such as Guinea-Bissau, we still don't have a record, as a 2015, by the way, of social assistance. So that's the state of social assistance in West Africa. I will then move on to another instrument of social protection, which is social insurance. Now, as a recap, so social insurance mostly looks at whether the active population is covered in terms of maternity, sickness, unemployment, unemployment injury, as well as like, do they have a pension such that at old age they will get a pension. So these are some of the things that we'll be looking at to check if people are covered. But we'll start by first checking if there are programs at least to cover these contingencies. Look at the ticks, there are many, particularly on child and family. That is, if a person dies, the children and family may have to remain covered by a program. Maternity, better. Sickness, you can see that a lot of countries are not covered by a medical aid, for instance. When you look at unemployment insurance in Central Africa, there is no cover at all. This is as at 2017. Then the rest, there seem to be programs of social insurance. In East Africa, the situation is also very, very mixed. Less coverage in terms of maternity, sickness, as well as unemployment. More coverage, more this almost perfect. There is coverage of the 9. So I was saying in North Africa, we have Mauritania as well as Libya, which does not have the coverage for all the 9 contingencies. Then in Southern Africa, also the situation is also mixed. Like if you look at unemployment insurance, it is only present in South Africa. The rest of the countries do not have unemployment insurance. Most countries have got old age being covered. So a lot of people are particularly having pensions. Then lastly, in West Africa, if you look at from employment injury in the table up to the old age, there is 100% program coverage. Right. So I will then emphasize whilst I'm here that this only means there is availability of programs, that is potential coverage. It does not tell us how many people are covered. We'll look at how many people are covered once we start the module on monitoring social investments in Africa. So a program being in place is one thing. How many people is covered by the program in place is another thing. Then I'll quickly move on to social services and access thereof. So here I will hit two birds with one stone. So social services definitely need to be in place. This would mean your education service, your health service, water services. You could even include housing services, etc. Mostly we concentrate on education and health because these seem to be the core for most countries. Then access to social services. We've got instruments that provide access. These could be your school feeding. So if there is a school feeding program, you will see that it is helping to provide children with both access to education as well as health. You've got your fee waivers. At times children don't pay school fees. At times you'll find that people are exempted from paying water bills. So those will be your fee waivers. Some instruments could include school supplies, scholarships, and that's an intervention towards education. The subsidies are a special component as well, because a subsidy reduces the price so that people may have access. These subsidies could be in agriculture, for instance, or subsidized housing, etc. Allowances are another instrument. So these are particularly used to provide access to existing services. Now, let's look at the case of Mauritania. When we started, I promised that we'll look at one case. So the state of health can be measured in 3 dimensions. That is the service dimension, the system performance dimension, as well as the investment dimension. So Mauritania is particularly doing very well in terms of service availability. Like it is clocking high above the regional average. So the dot that is blue shows the country value, and then the bar that is green on our service dimension shows the regional average. So you can tell that Mauritania has been performing quite better. But in terms of system performance dimension, you can tell that it is somewhat below the regional average. This is also true for the investment dimensions. This can be done for each and every country, and the World Health Organization does so, and in its publications, it gives these for each and every country. So it helps us to see where we are or the state of health in each country. Then in terms of education, I've picked Kenya as an example, and here I take items such as the public expenditure on education as a percentage of GDP, and one can tell that it is always between 5 and 6%, and it has always been maintained at that. The other commitments from the budget can be shown under expenditure on education as a percentage of total government expenditure, which is almost 20%, which was almost 20% in 2013, and it's always between 15% and 20%. The rest of the expenditures you should be able to see and read for yourself. So this gives us an overview of the state of social investment in Africa. And in summary, it is broken down as follows. We have looked at the state of social protection, that is the state of social assistance, social insurance, and access to social services. And then in terms of social services, ceteris paribus, we looked at 2 cases, that is the state of health services in Mauritania, as well as the state of education in Kenya. Thank you so much.